There's something about being underground that changes everything. The moment you descend those first steps into a subway station, the world above you, the sunlight, the noise, the crowd, the safety, it all just disappears. What replaces it is something else entirely. Concrete walls, flickering lights, the distant screech of metal on metal, a smell that doesn't exist anywhere else on Earth, and the feeling, that creeping, impossible-to-shake feeling, that something down here is not quite right. Most of the time, nothing happens. Most of the time, you board your train, scroll your phone, and arrive at your destination without incident. You barely even think about it. But sometimes, just sometimes, the underground shows you something it was never supposed to. The stories you're about to read are real. They were submitted by real people who live in cities across the United States. People who use the subway every day, just like millions of others. People who thought they knew what to expect when they walked down those stairs. They were wrong. These aren't ghost stories. These aren't urban legends. These are first-hand accounts of things that actually happened in the tunnels, on the platforms, and inside the cars of America's most used transit systems. Things that changed these people forever. Read every word. Because some of what you're about to discover, some of what has been living beneath your city this entire time, is going to follow you long after you finish reading. Don't say we didn't warn you. 35 years in the dark, a transit worker's night that almost cost him everything. His name is Raymond. He's been a transit station supervisor for the Chicago Transit Authority for 35 years. 35 years. Think about that for a moment. Think about how much the world has changed in 35 years. The technology, the cities, the culture, all of it transformed beyond recognition. But Raymond has been in the same tunnels, managing the same stations, walking the same platforms, for all of it. He's seen more things underground than most people will see in a lifetime. He's worked every shift imaginable, early morning, midday, evening rush, and the one that no one wants, the overnight. For transit workers, a manager has to be on duty at all times. That means someone always has to take the night shift, and over 35 years, Raymond has pulled his share of overnight rotations. He doesn't mind most of them. During the night hours, the trains run nearly empty. The crowds and the noise and the constant movement of the daytime system slow to almost nothing. He describes the overnight trains as the one small luxury of working nights, gliding through dark tunnels in total silence. Car after car completely empty, nothing but the hum of the tracks beneath you. He says it's almost peaceful. He has a collection of strange stories from those overnight hours. Funny ones, weird ones, the kind that become great party conversation decades later. A drunk Wall Street type who fell asleep and rode the same loop 7 times. A guy who brought an entire Thanksgiving spread onto the train and offered Raymond a plate of turkey at 4 a.m. Small moments of absurdity that make the overnight shift feel almost worth it. But there is one story Raymond does not tell at parties. There is one story he doesn't tell anyone, actually. Not unless he trusts them completely. Not unless they ask directly. Because this story isn't funny. This story isn't weird in the charming, harmless way of the others. This story is something different altogether. It happened on a Tuesday. Raymond had just boarded a train to travel between stations, a routine part of his overnight rounds. He stepped onto the car at approximately 2:50 in the morning. The car was empty. He sat down, checked his phone, and watched the underground blur past the windows. At the next station, someone got on. Raymond noticed him immediately. Tall, well over 6 feet, thin in the way that makes clothing hang wrong on a person. He was wearing a heavy winter coat despite the fact that it was the tail end of September, and a knit beanie pulled low over his forehead. His face was partially in shadow, but Raymond caught the quick, sharp look the man shot him as he boarded, a glance that was too fast to be casual and too deliberate to be accidental. The man walked to the far end of the car and sat in the corner, the furthest possible, a distance from Raymond. Raymond looked away. He's a professional. He's been riding these trains for decades. He knows better than to let a strange passenger get under his skin. He went back to his phone, but he could feel it. Every 30 seconds or so, sometimes more, sometimes less, he could feel the man's eyes on him. That specific, particular sensation of being watched that every human being instinctively recognizes. Raymond would glance up and find the man staring. The man would look away. Raymond would return to his phone. And then, 30 seconds later, he would feel it again. By the time they reached Raymond's stop, he had decided one thing. He needed to get off this train and into his office. He rose, moved to the doors, and stepped out onto the platform. The man in the winter coat stepped out right behind him. Raymond kept his pace steady. He was experienced enough to know that panic was never your friend in a situation like this. Not when you didn't know yet whether this was something or Nathan, whether this was a coincidence, or something worse. He walked to his station office, pulled out his keys, unlocked the door, and stepped inside. Before he closed the door, he looked back. The man was standing on the platform approximately 50 feet away, pacing slowly, not walking anywhere in particular, just pacing, back and forth, watching. Raymond shut the door, locked it, 2 deadbolts. He sat at his desk and tried to focus on his work. 5 minutes passed. Then came the sound at the door. It started as a soft rattling, the kind of sound a doorknob makes when someone tries to turn it carefully, slowly, testing to see if it will give. It didn't give. The locks held. Then came the knocking. Not loud, not frantic. That was almost the worst part. The knocking was soft and patient, like whoever was on the other side had all the time in the world and was perfectly comfortable standing there in the dark, empty station, knocking on an underground office door at 3 a.m. "Who's there?" Raymond called out. The response came immediately. "I just want to talk." Raymond felt the bottom drop out of his stomach. He told the person on the other side to leave. He kept his voice even, authoritative, the voice he'd spent 35 years developing for exactly these moments. The knocking continued. It went on for 5 full minutes, patient, consistent, relentless. Raymond sat at his desk with his hand near his radio and tried to remember his training. He tried to stay calm. He reminded himself that he was behind 2 locked doors in a secure facility. Then he pulled up the security monitors. The station had cameras positioned throughout, standard setup for a CTA facility. Raymond navigated to the feed covering his office door and brought it up on screen. There he was, the man in the winter coat, beanie still pulled low, standing directly in front of Raymond's door, one hand still raised in the position of someone mid-knock. But here is where the story takes its first strange turn. The moment Raymond's eyes found the man on the security monitor, as if the man somehow sensed he was being watched through the camera, he slowly lowered his hand. He turned and looked directly up at the camera lens, stared at it for a long moment. Then he turned and walked away. Raymond stayed in his office for another 45 minutes. He made himself wait. He made himself calm down, do his work, check his logs, complete his tasks. When he was finally ready to leave, he pulled up the camera feeds and checked every angle of the station before opening his door. Empty. The platform was clear. Raymond locked up and descended the stairs to the train platform. He checked his watch. The next train was due in 4 minutes. He stood near the platform edge and waited. 2 minutes in, he heard footsteps on the stairs behind him. He turned. The man in the winter coat was descending the stairs. He reached the platform, looked across at Raymond, and then, without any expression that Raymond could read, walked to the other side of the car and sat down as the train arrived. Same car, different side. Raymond boarded. He found a seat. He positioned himself so he could see the man in his peripheral vision without making eye contact. The train began to move. For the duration of that ride, Raymond kept his eyes forward. The man stared at him. Raymond knew this without having to look. He could feel it with the same certainty he'd felt it on the first train. That locked, deliberate, unblinking attention. At one point, Raymond made the decision to look back, to nod, to offer some small gesture of acknowledgement that might diffuse whatever was happening here. He looked up. He nodded once. The man stared back at him without moving, without nodding in return, without any indication that he had registered the gesture at all. Raymond looked away and did not look back again for the rest of the ride. When the train reached the next station, Raymond got off quickly. He moved through the platform and up the stairs to street level, faster than he normally would. Not quite running, but close. His heart was pushing hard in his chest. He emerged onto an empty Chicago street at 4 a.m. and thought, just for a moment, that he had made it. Then he heard the footsteps. He turned. The man in the winter coat was following him down the sidewalk. Raymond made a decision. He scanned the block, looking for somewhere, anywhere, that was still open, that had lights on, that had people. Most of the city was dark, but halfway down the block, through a plate glass window, he could see the amber glow of a 24-hour fast food restaurant. A couple of figures inside moving behind the counter. He pushed through the door. He took a booth near the back where he could watch the entrance. He ordered something just to have something in front of him, to look like he belonged there. And then, outside the window, the man from the train walked up to the glass. He stopped directly in front of the window. He looked in. He found Raymond through the glass. He stared. 10 seconds, maybe 15. Raymond held his breath and did not move. Then the man turned. He crossed the street. He disappeared down the sidewalk into the dark. Raymond sat in that restaurant for 20 minutes before leaving. He flagged down the first occupied cab he saw to get to his final station of the night, not wanting to risk another train platform. He thought it was over. It was not over. When Raymond arrived at his third station and began his final check of the evening, something made him pull up the external security cameras. Habit. Paranoia. The kind of instinct that 35 years of overnight work carves into a person. The man was there, outside the station, approximately 30 feet from the entrance, pacing again. That same slow, deliberate back-and-forth movement that Raymond had seen on the first platform 3 hours ago. As Raymond watched the monitor, the man stopped pacing. He looked up at the camera. He did not move for a full 60 seconds. Raymond counted. He sat there in his underground office watching this man stare into the camera lens from 30 feet away. And he counted every second. 1 Mississippi. 2 Mississippi, all the way to 60. Then the man lowered his head. He turned. He walked out of the frame and disappeared. Raymond never saw him again. He doesn't know who the man was. He doesn't know what the man wanted. He doesn't know if what followed him from that first train to the restaurant to the third station was random fixation or something more intentional. Something more calculated. He thinks about the timing. The fact that the man appeared to react both times Raymond turned on a camera. As if, somehow, he could tell. Raymond still works the overnight shift occasionally. He says he's made peace with it. He says he trusts his training and his locks and his cameras. But he checks those cameras a lot more than he used to. The trap. What four friends discovered when they tried to be heroes. This story comes from Marcus, who was 24 years old when it happened. He and three friends, Dion, Tyler, and a woman they'd met at the party earlier that night named Priya, were heading home through the New York City subway system at approximately 2:15 in the morning on a Saturday in December. It was cold. The city outside was beautiful the way New York gets beautiful in December. The holiday lights strung along Fifth Avenue, the steam rising from the grates, the particular quality of cold city air that smells like pretzels and exhaust and something metallic. They'd had a good night. A great night, actually. A friend's birthday party in Brooklyn, the kind where you lose track of time entirely and then look up and it's suddenly 2 a.m. and you're more sober than you were an hour ago but still loose enough to be loud on the subway. They found an empty car and collapsed into the seats, still laughing about something from the party. The train began to move. The tunnels slid past outside the windows. Then the commotion started. It came from the car ahead of them, a sharp, sudden burst of noise that cut right through their conversation and brought all four of them immediately to attention. Someone was screaming. A woman's voice, high and urgent and absolutely real. Marcus was on his feet before he'd consciously decided to stand. He moved to the glass panel at the end of the car and peered through into the next car over. What he saw made his stomach drop. A woman, mid-30s he estimated, dressed in a dark coat, was pressed back against her seat while two young men stood over her, invading her space with a posture that was unmistakably threatening. They were wearing dark hooded sweatshirts, hoods up, faces partially obscured. They were big, bigger than Marcus had expected, and they were close to her. Too close, the kind of close that is not accidental, that is designed to make someone feel trapped and small and terrified. The woman was screaming for help. Marcus turned back to his friends. "We need to go in there," he said. His friend Dion was already standing. Tyler looked uncertain. Priya was watching through the glass, face pale. Marcus and Dion moved toward the door connecting the cars. They got closer. They got a better look. One of the two young men had shifted slightly, and Marcus saw it clearly under the fluorescent lights of the subway car. A compact black handgun tucked into the front waistband of his pants. His partner, Marcus now realized, likely had one too. The way he was standing, the way his hand kept drifting to his pocket. Marcus stopped. He grabbed Dion's arm. He looked back at Tyler. He made a decision in approximately 1 second. "Other way," he said quietly. "Now." He pushed his friends back through the car in the direction opposite the two armed men, through another connecting door, putting another car's worth of distance between them. He was moving fast, fast enough to communicate urgency without triggering panic in the others. But when he looked back through the rear window of the car they'd just entered, he saw one of the men pointing at them. They'd been seen. "Run," Marcus said. What followed was one of the most terrifying minutes of Marcus's life. The four of them sprinted through car after car. The train was still moving at this point, which made the running strange and lurching, the floor swaying beneath their feet, the connecting doors between cars slamming open and banging shut behind them. Marcus kept looking back. The two men were following, not running, walking fast, purposefully, the way people walk when they're confident that eventually they'll catch what they're chasing. The train reached a station. The doors opened. They ran. They blew through the station like they were being chased by something terrible, which they were. And Marcus lost track of exactly how many platforms they crossed and how many stairways they flew down before the group began to splinter. He and Priya took a turn that Dion and Tyler didn't. In the chaos and the noise and the underground geography of the station, he got separated. He was alone. The station was old, one of the older lines with the high tiled ceilings and thick structural columns, and the particular kind of echoing silence that makes every sound feel too loud. Marcus could hear footsteps. He couldn't tell how far away they were or which direction they were coming from. The acoustics of old subway stations are strange. Sounds bend around corners and bounce off tiles in ways that are deeply disorienting. He found a large industrial garbage bin near a maintenance corridor and ducked behind it. He pressed himself into the space between the bin and the wall and made himself as small as he could, controlling his breathing, trying to slow his heart. He heard the footsteps get louder. He heard them slow. He pressed his eye to a small gap at the top of the bin where the lid didn't quite close, flush, and looked. They were closer than he'd thought. Both of them, moving through the station methodically, checking alcoves and stairwells with the practiced ease of people who had done something like this before. Marcus got a clear look at them for the first time. Young, genuinely young, maybe 19 or 20. One was tall and lean, the other shorter and stockier. They moved with a kind of easy confidence that made Marcus's chest tighten. Then one of them spoke. "If you find them, we kill them." Marcus later says that he has replayed those 5 words approximately 10,000 times since that night. He says there is a specific quality to hearing something like that spoken out loud. Matter of fact, casual, the way you might tell someone to grab milk on the way home. That is uniquely, profoundly terrifying. It's the casualness of it, the complete absence of hesitation or drama. Marcus nearly gasped out loud. He says his body physically tried to react. His throat opened, his hands jerked, and he had to exert almost everything he had to suppress the sound. He gripped the edge of the garbage bin. He held still. The 2 men kept moving. He tracked them through his gap in the lid until they disappeared around a corner. Then he waited. He counted to 60. He counted to 60 again. Then he ran. He found Dion and Tyler less than a minute later. They were crouched behind a thick concrete column near the far end of the station, waving at him frantically. He joined them. Priya emerged from a different direction 30 seconds after that, her face white, her eyes wide. They pressed together behind the columns and waited in silence. That's when they saw the woman. The woman from the train, the one who had been screaming, the one they had seen pressed against her seat in terror. The reason Marcus and Dion had nearly walked into an armed confrontation was walking through the station, calmly, walking in the direction of the 2 men who had been threatening her. Priya grabbed Marcus's arm. The woman reached the 2 men and spoke to them. From the distance, they couldn't make out the words clearly, but the posture, the body language, the casual familiarity of how she stood with them, told a story that none of them had expected to hear. Whatever she said, whatever question she asked, was answered with a shrug. They conferred briefly. Then all 3 of them walked back down toward the platforms. Marcus understood. It had been a trap. The woman had been the bait. The scream, the apparent distress, the performance of being in danger, designed to pull the right kind of person, a good Samaritan, a hero, into the next car, into reach. The 2 armed men would have done the rest. They had nearly walked directly into it. Marcus says that he thinks about the version of events where he and Dion pushed through that connecting door without getting close enough to see the guns. He thinks about what would have happened on that late December train on the New York City subway system if they had been slightly less cautious, Slightly less observant, slightly less lucky. He doesn't let himself think about it too long. They called the police that night and reported everything. Badge numbers, descriptions, the station, the time. Marcus says he never found out whether the three were caught. He hopes they were. He's not sure. The men in the tunnel, what Danny saw and what it might mean. My name is Danny. I'm 23 years old. I'm writing this down because I need someone else to know what I saw. I need to put it somewhere outside of my own head, where I've been carrying it alone for almost 2 years now. I live in New York City. I work in Midtown. I don't own a car. I've never owned a car, never needed one. And so the subways is my life. I take it to work. I take it home. I take it to the grocery store, to the gym, to my friends' apartments across boroughs. I know the subway the way you know a road you've driven 1,000 times. The particular sounds of different lines, which cars to avoid during rush hour, which platforms are coldest in winter, which stations have the best tile work from the original construction. I am not someone who is afraid of the subway. I want to be very clear about that, because what I'm about to tell you is the kind of story that people dismiss by saying, "Oh, you're just jumpy," or "That's what happens when you take the train alone at night." I have taken the train alone at night hundreds of times. Hundreds. I know the difference between a strange feeling and an actually strange situation. This was an actually strange situation. It was a Saturday night in October. I'd been at a friend's apartment in the East Village, a birthday party, low-key, the kind that winds down gradually rather than ending sharply. By the time I left, it was past midnight. I wasn't drunk. I wasn't tired, particularly. I was just ready to go home. I walked to the subway station I always use when I'm in that neighborhood. I know this station. I've used it probably 50 times. I walked down the stairs, through the turnstile, down another set of stairs to the platform. The platform was empty. Not unusual for after midnight on that particular line. The trains run less frequently. The crowds thin out. Sometimes you wait on an empty platform for 10 or 12 minutes without seeing another soul. I've done it many times. I found a bench near the middle of the platform and sat down. I checked my phone. 12 minutes until the next train. That's when I first noticed something felt different. I don't know how to describe it precisely without sounding like I'm reaching for drama. It wasn't a sound or a sight, not yet. It was a feeling. The feeling of being observed. That specific instinctive awareness that registers in the back of your neck before your conscious mind has processed anything. I looked up and down the platform. Nothing. Just the platform. The yellow warning strips at the edge. The columns. The benches. The posters. The tunnel entrance. I looked at the tunnel entrance at the far end of the platform. The dark circle where the tracks disappear into the underground. I've looked at 100 subway tunnel entrances without a second thought. And this time I kept looking. And then, he was there. A man had materialized at the edge of the tunnel, not all the way out onto the platform, but in that threshold space where the darkness of the tunnel meets the light of the station. He was standing on the tracks. He had poked his head and shoulders out from inside the tunnel, and he was looking directly at me. I can describe him in detail because I've described him to myself so many times since. He was middle-aged, maybe 40 to 45. His face was deeply dirty, not the ordinary kind of dirty that comes from being outside or unwashed, but the deep, ground-in kind that comes from living underground. His hair was matted. His clothes were dark with grime. He smiled at me. It was the worst smile I've ever seen in my life. I want to be careful when I say this because I know how that sounds. A lot of things people describe as the worst thing I've ever seen are really just ordinary things in an unsettling context. But this smile, I have thought about it many times, tried to find a way to make it less than what it was, and I can't. It was wrong. The proportions were wrong. The quality of it was wrong. This was not a smile of greeting or friendliness or even of madness exactly. It was something else. Something that had learned to approximate the shape of a smile without understanding what a smile is for. He called out to me. He said, "Hey, over here, buddy." I looked away. I stared at my phone. I told myself this was nothing. This was just someone living in the tunnel. This happened in New York. This was not a unique situation, and there was nothing specifically threatening about it. The man laughed, and then from somewhere deeper inside the tunnel, something moved. A second man appeared beside the first. He came from behind, from further inside the tunnel, from somewhere in that total darkness that the platform lights don't reach. He was similar in appearance, middle-aged, filthy, moving with a strange looseness that made me think of something not quite right in the joints. He smiled too, and this smile was worse than the first man's somehow. Not because of its own particular quality, but because now there were two of them. Two identical, terrible smiles aimed at me from inside the tunnel. This second man told me to come hang out with them inside. I kept my eyes on my phone. I focused on the screen with every bit of concentration I had. I told myself 10 more minutes and the train would be here. I told myself I was on a busy platform in New York City, that the conductor would be in the first car, that I just had to stay where I was and not do anything. In my peripheral vision, I watched the first man move back into the tunnel. Not away, just back, retreating into the darkness a few feet. I didn't understand why. Then he came back with something. He came back with a third face. This is the part of the story that I struggle to describe in a way that conveys what it was actually like to see it. Because the face he came back with, the third face that appeared in the entrance to the tunnel, was not behaving the way faces behave. It was not upright. It was not animated with the small, constant movements that living faces make. The tiny adjustments of the eyes, the unconscious shifts of the jaw and cheeks and brow. It was being held up. The first man had something in his hand. He was holding something up so that it protruded forward into the light, toward the platform, and the thing he was holding, the thing he was presenting to me, like a prop, like a performance, was a human head. At least that's what it appeared to be. A severed human head. No body, just a head, held at the wrist by the first man, angled to face outward toward the platform, toward me. The face was wrong in a way that went beyond the obvious wrongness of what it was. The eyes were open but unfocused. The skin had a color and quality that was unlike anything I'd ever seen in a living or a dead face. The jaw hung slightly open. I think I made a sound. I don't remember making a sound, but I must have, because I found myself standing up without any memory of standing up, taking a step backward, putting distance between myself and the tunnel entrance. My whole body had acted before my mind could, and then, thank God, I heard it. The sound of the train. A distant vibration at first, then a building rush of air, and the scream of metal on the far rails, and the headlights appearing in the tunnel entrance and flooding the darkness with light. The two men disappeared. They moved back into the tunnel with the speed of people who know when to retreat. I watched them go. I watched the space where they had been. I walked to the train doors on unsteady legs and got on. I had every intention of going immediately to the conductor. I knew where the conductor's car was, the first car. I was going to tell him exactly what I had seen, describe the men, describe the location, describe the object. I was going to be responsible about this. But as the train pulled away from the station, I looked out the window. At the top of the stairs I had come down less than 15 minutes ago, the stairs leading down to the platform I had just escaped, I saw legs. Just legs, moving quickly, descending the stairs. Someone coming down to the platform. Maybe multiple someones. I couldn't see anything above the waist. The train was already moving, and the angle was wrong. But I saw the legs, and then the train entered the tunnel. My window became a dark mirror. And in that dark mirror, for just a fraction of a second before the tunnel swallowed everything, I saw them. Along the wall of the tunnel, pressed against the railing less than 3 feet from the window, a group of men, clustered together in the narrow space between the train and the tunnel wall. Standing very still. All of them looking directly at me as the train passed. I screamed. I don't know what else to call it. I hammered on the conductor's door with the flat of my fist, and I screamed that there was an emergency. The door opened. The conductor, an older man somewhere in his 60s with the kind of face that has seen everything, looked at me. I told him what I'd seen. All of it. He didn't laugh. He didn't dismiss me. He picked up his radio and made 2 calls. One to the station I'd just left. One to what I understood to be a supervisor or a security coordinator. He spoke in shorthand that I didn't fully follow, but I heard him describe the station and the platform. And I heard him say the words unauthorized individuals and tunnel breach. He told me to stay in the car. The rest of that ride took years. Every station felt like it was an hour apart. I sat in the conductor's car and stared at my hands and tried to slow my breathing. I thought about the head. I thought about whether it had been real. I tried to construct explanations, a prop, a mannequin part, some bizarre, elaborate prank. I couldn't make any of those explanations feel true in a way that my body believed. When my stop finally came, I walked off the train and up the stairs and out into the cold air with the particular quality of relief that you only feel when you have been genuinely, physically afraid, and then that fear is over. My legs were shaking. The air tasted extraordinary. I have never stopped thinking about what I saw. In the months after, I did some research. I talked to people who had worked in city transit. I tried to find out what, if anything, existed in the tunnels beneath New York City, beneath any major American city, in terms of unauthorized habitation, in terms of what kind of life is possible in that underground darkness that the rest of us never see. What I found was not reassuring. There are tunnels in New York City that have not been used for passenger service in decades. There are access tunnels and maintenance passages and ventilation shafts that exist in a layer of the city that is entirely separate from the one most people know. And some of those spaces are inhabited. Some of those spaces have been inhabited for years by people who have found ways to exist in the dark, below the city, outside of every system and structure that the rest of us rely on. Most of them are people in desperate situations. Most of them are people who have fallen through every safety net that exists and found themselves somehow in the tunnels. But most is not all. I do not know what the men I saw were doing in that tunnel that Saturday night in October. I do not know what they were doing with what I believe, what I am almost certain I saw in the first man's hand. I do not know what would have happened if I had gone over to the edge of the platform. I do not know what would have happened to the person or persons whose descent I saw at the top of the stairs as my train pulled away. I know this. I have taken the subway hundreds of times since that night. I take it to work every day. I do not let myself be afraid of it, because if I let myself be afraid of it, I would have to stop using it, and I can't stop using it. And letting fear control your behavior is a way of giving control of your life to the thing you're afraid of. But I change my behavior at night. I do not take that station anymore. I take the extra 8-block walk to the next one. I think about the position of the tunnel entrances when I choose where to sit on the platform. I look at tunnel entrances every single time when I'm waiting for a train, and I never, ever stand close to the edge when the tunnels are dark. I've told 3 people this story, and all 3 of them said they believe me. I think they believe me because of the specificity, because the things I described are not the things you invent when you're making something up. You don't invent the terrible quality of a smile in the dark. You don't invent the particular wrongness of a face held at an angle it should not be held at. You don't invent the way a group of men in a dark tunnel turn, in unison, to look at you as you pass. The underground is beneath every American city. It is beneath your city, wherever you are reading this. It runs under your streets and your buildings and your homes. Millions of people use it every single day, without incident, without strangeness, without the slightest hint of anything wrong. But it has its hours. And in those hours, in the deep overnight, when the trains run empty and the platforms echo and the lights at the tunnel entrances seem to throw more shadow than they dispel, the underground becomes something different, something older, something that does not belong to the system that built it or the city that uses it, something that has its own rules. Be careful down there. Be aware of your surroundings. Trust the feeling in the back of your neck. If something feels wrong, leave. Take a cab. Call someone. Wait in a lit space with people around you. The extra 20 minutes is always worth it. Not everything that lives underground comes up to street level when you're watching. Some of it waits. What these stories tell us 3 stories. 3 different cities, 3 different nights. 3 different people whose only crime was using public transportation at the wrong hour. What do they have in common? In each case, the person involved was alone, or effectively alone. In each case, the situation escalated gradually. Never a sudden shock. Always a slow tightening of something that was wrong from the beginning, but didn't become clearly threatening until escape was much harder. And in each case, the person survived because they trusted their instincts early enough, even when those instincts told them something their rational minds were reluctant to accept. Raymond survived because 35 years in the tunnels had sharpened his sense of when something was off, and because he got behind a locked door before he found out exactly how off it was. Marcus and his friends survived because they got close enough to see, clearly, recognized the reality of what they were dealing with, and changed direction before it was too late. Because they chose self-preservation over heroism at a moment when the two were genuinely at odds. Danny survived because a train arrived. The margin of safety in each of these situations was thin, terrifyingly thin. In any one of them, a slightly different sequence of events, a delayed train, a moment of hesitation, a missed detail, could have produced a story with a very different ending. The underground is not inherently dangerous. The vast majority of the hundreds of millions of rides taken on American subway systems every year end without incident. The overnight hours are not inherently dangerous. Most people who take late trains arrive home safely, without anything of note occurring. But the underground is a place where the normal rules of visibility and accountability are reduced, where help is further away, where the exits are controlled and the sight lines are limited, and the people who are present at 3 a.m. are a very different cross-section of humanity than the people who are present at 3 p.m. These things are worth knowing. They are worth keeping in mind the next time you descend those stairs and leave the world above behind. Because the underground has its secrets, and most of those secrets, most of the time, stay underground. Most of the time.